All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me all right? All right. Welcome to our 2024 elections crash course. My name is Dr. B. Zhao. I'm a political science professor, and I'm very happy to moderate this panel. And as we all know, election is approaching fast. You probably are getting information and news from a lot of different places. So we thought it's a good time for us to explore the historical context and political parties and ideologies, key elections and events to watch, and strategies for critically evaluating political communication during this election season. After all, being informed about elections is fundamental to the health and stability of any democracy. Well, there is a lot to talk about. The goal for today is to focus on parties, key races, factors driving electoral outcomes, and news media. So we hope to provide a social science perspective that can help us understand elections. And just a reminder, we won't be able to cover everything today, but today is a start of conversation. And I hope you keep tuning in for future events and talks like these on our website, in your emails. And if you have any unanswered questions at the end of our panel, feel free to reach out to our panelists. I'm sure they'll love to be connected. All right, so for today, we have three panelists, and let me introduce each one of them. All right, first, Dr. Sarah James is an assistant professor of political science at Gonzaga University. She received her PhD in government and social policy at Harvard in 2021. Prior to graduate school, she worked in K-12 education, first as a teacher and later a high school principal in Boston. Outside of work, she loves to cook, especially with ingredients native to wherever she's living, and does bar and yoga. Along with her partner, she has two kids and a golden retriever, and they're on a family mission to visit all of the presidential museums, libraries, and his national historical sites. And second up, Dr. Aaron Highfield is an assistant professor of political science at Whitworth University. His research and teaching focus on American political institutions, electoral politics, public opinion, and political behavior. Additionally, his recent work focusing on federalism, representation in government, and electoral politics has been published in American Politics Research, as well as the Forum. Last but not least, Dr. Rebecca Donaway. Her research is interested in political communication. Her work considers what forms political information take, what it looks like, and what users choose to do with the information, such as engage or disengage in the political process. Dr. Donaway's recent projects have considered the effects of emojis in news, effective reaction to political information, and partisan messaging during the 2020 election. Let's give them a round of applause. So we will start with each of our panelists about 15 minutes to share with us their expertise. And meanwhile, as you're listening to our panelists, I encourage you to use the QR code on the slide, and they will be on each slide actually, to submit questions if you have any. And then after the panelists have given their presentation, we'll try to answer some of those questions that you submitted.
All right, I'm going to get us started today. And if you're in my classes, I already wrote you down, so you don't have to send me a picture. I'm trying to save my inbox. That would be a lot of pictures. Okay, so I'm going to get us started today with some questions that might be seemingly really basic, but I think they're really important to understand, and at least in some detail, in order to put some perspective and kind of guide our thinking and information seeking over the next, I should probably count how many months, like 6-ish months in which we're going to be in full-throated election season. So the first question that I think it's important to understand is, why do we have elections in the first place? And as we often talk about in my classes, there's the story we tell middle schoolers, and then there's like the real story. So the story that we often tell young kiddos is, well, we have a government by the people, of the people, and for the people, so we probably need to have the way for the people to be involved. That's true, but it is a little bit more complicated than that. We have what's called a democratic republic. That is the type of democracy that the United States has, which means that we are not empowered as citizens, as voters, to have input on every single policy decision that gets made by the country, by the state, or by our localities. Instead, the system that our founders set up is one in which we select people that we believe are going to represent our best interests. And then they go and have the privilege of trying to get informed and dealing with all of the policy questions as they come up. And the reason this is important to elections is because elections are our way to give those representatives feedback on how they're doing at representing our interests. If we think people are doing a good job, we can re-elect them, or if we think someone else is going to do a better job, an election is an opportunity to switch out the people that are representing us and put someone else in place. So that's why we have elections. And pretty shortly after we started having elections, we started to get some things forming that started to approximate political parties. And our first president was not happy about this. So George Washington, he served 2 terms as president. He was incredibly popular. And on his way out, people were saying, please don't leave. We're not sure what's going to happen yet. Please stay. And he said, no, it's really important for me to step down to show that people in charge in our democracy can and should step down to let other people take their place, right? And so he did that, but in his farewell address, he gave the country some warnings and some messages and some wisdom, one of which was avoid political parties, right? He said, even though they might be popular, they're likely in the course of time to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men are going to subvert the power of the people. They're going to usurp power for themselves if they start making political parties. The problem was that as Washington was leaving, the first political parties were already forming. His vice president, John Adams, was a key figure in the Federalist Party, and his Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, was a key figure in the Anti-Federalist Party. And they had a lot of disagreements about what, how, when government should function. Which leads me to the question of, okay, so what are political parties and what role do they serve in elections? A political party, very simply, is an organization, a group of people that are working together to try and control government, try and win control over government. And when we think of parties, you probably think of the words Democratic and Republican, or Democrats and Republicans, and those are our 2 major parties today. We've had other parties in the United States. The Federalists and the Anti-Federalists were some of our first ones. We also have other parties like the Green Party, Democratic Socialist Party, some of which have had more electoral success than others. But that's what a party is. And this is different from ideology. And we'll talk in a second about how that hasn't always, that has kind of ebbed and flowed over the course of American history. But when we talk about ideology in political science and in politics, what we're talking about are people's beliefs about how the world should work. It's a coherent set of beliefs in the case of politics about what government should do, what government should not do, and how it should function. As we'll talk about again in a minute, there have been periods in American history where your party and your ideology were synonymous. That's the moment we're in right now, right? If I tell you that I'm a Republican, you can then pretty clearly assume, or pretty reliably assume, oh, you're probably conservative, right? Most of the conservatives are in the Republican Party. And if I said, oh, I'm a liberal, you could probably pretty reliably assume, oh, you must be voting for Democrats. There's obviously not a universal kind of deterministic relationship, but by and large, that is how ideology and party maps onto one another in today's politics. This hasn't always been the case. There have been periods in American history where you would have to ask someone, hey, are you conservative? And they would say, yeah. And then you'd have to say, oh, do you vote for Democrats or Republicans? Right. And there was more, a wider range of ideologies within each party. And we're going to talk about in a minute why that's important for trying to understand our elections today. Before we do that, though, I want to further share just some thoughts that political scientists, some research that political scientists have done on the importance of political parties in the electoral process, right? So the first big role that parties play is maybe one that is more obvious to us that we kind of see every day, and that is humans really like to have teams. They like to feel like they belong. We like to have a mascot and a color and a special name, and we like to know who's with us and who's against us. And political parties are a way of doing that in politics, right? If I'm a Republican and you're a Republican, or I'm a Democrat and you're a Democrat, then that is a way for both politicians and the public to kind of start to suss out, who do I want to vote for and who do I want to be with, right? So it both helps facilitate choices, and if people are feeling really connected and inspired by their political party, it can be motivating to help them get out to vote, to kind of help their team win. This is a example from 2020 that the Republican Party sent out, I believe in Kentucky, that was encouraging Republicans to get out and vote for Donald Trump, but then to also vote for people down ballot on the ticket. So to vote for their senators, for a judge, and for their congressperson. The next thing that parties do is actually for the candidates. And this is something that we don't often think about, I think, as voters, unless some of you have run for office. But parties serve really important purposes for structuring how, why, and for how long people decide that it's worth it to them to run for political office, right? Oftentimes when you're running for office, there's only one spot and a lot of people running. And part of what parties do is they offer a long-term structure, a long-term organizational home for people when they don't win elections, right? So they can come back and try again. And so this is the slate of Republican primary candidates back, I don't know, probably like 6 months ago. We haven't had this many people in the Republican primary for a while. But the idea was people were throwing their name in the ring to say, maybe I want to be a Republican nominee. And as they slowly dropped out, they can still potentially maintain connection with the party and try again in future years. So if you ever heard when Nikki Haley was the last person in the race, or Ron DeSantis, oh, they're not really trying to win in 2024. They're just trying to make a name for themselves for 2028. That's the idea, that if they get a place in the party now, they can come back later and have more success and kind of more traction in getting supporters. The next thing that parties do is they structure their own primary processes, and they structure how their supporters select their nominees for contests. So this is a picture from the 2020 Republican National Convention. We will have new conventions in August, and the Democratic one might be in July. But it used to be, before the 1970s, that these were kind of like Pope selection-like affairs, where the party elites would go into a back room and you wouldn't really know as a person out in the public who was going to be the presidential nominee for your party. And then they would come out and announce it. And sometimes it'd be a surprise, sometimes it wouldn't be. After the 1970s, for a variety of reasons we're not going to get into right now, both parties switched to a popular primary. So the primary, the convention now, is kind of just a rubber stamping celebration and kind of the kickoff of the final stretch of the election season. But all of that is run by the party, not by the government itself. And then the final thing that parties are trying to do is, once they win elections, they then want to organize themselves to influence government. And Donald Trump and his nominees to the Supreme Court are a really clear recent example of this. When he was running for president in 2016, he was the first presidential candidate to release a pre-vetted list of judges. And he said, well, if you elect me, I will pull from this list to nominate pro-life justices to the Supreme Court. And he got really staunch support from evangelical Christians in particular, and pro-life supporters, because he made this declaration. And sure enough, he won the election, got the job, and he had 3 appointees to the court, all of whom were really critical votes in overturning Roe v. Wade in the Dobbs decision in 2022, right? So he made a promise to a party, he got control, he delivered on that promise, and that helped build support for his future candidacy. So political parties have changed over time. And a really important thing to think about and to know if you are wondering, politics feels a little icky right now, or maybe it feels really overwhelming, or it feels really vitriolic. You're not crazy. We are in a moment of time in which American politics is really a lot more intense and vitriolic than it has been in the past. And the reason for this is that our parties have polarized. And what this means is that the person who's kind of the average Democrat and the average Republican, there's a whole lot of fancy math behind this. We're not going to worry about that right now, but trust me. Their views have been moving farther and farther apart from one another over the last 50 years or so. These charts were made by Pew Research Center, and this is charting the opinions of the public. So just kind of your average American. And you can see that in 1994, the median Democrat and the median Republican were like, they had a lot of overlap, right? They were pretty close to one another, and there were a lot of people that could probably find something to agree on. By 2017, there's a lot less overlap and there's more people on the extremes. If you look at people who are politically engaged, so you look at people who say, yeah, I pay attention to politics, not just kind of the average person. And believe it or not, the average person does not pay that much attention to politics. But we do, so that's why we're here. And this pattern is even starker, right? Kind of your median Republican is much farther from your median Democrat. And this again means it's going to be harder to govern once these people from political parties get into office, because they're not going to have as much that they can agree on or compromise. We've had moments of polarization in the past. If you think of the Gilded Age in the 1920s, that was an era of very high polarization. There have been other moments of polarization in the 19th century. But what is particularly pernicious about the polarization patterns that we have right now is that it's not only that people disagree with one another about the policies that we should be implementing, so whether we should be implementing conservative or liberal policies, we have an incredibly high rate of affective polarization right now, which means that people disagree with one another from the two parties. And not only do they disagree with one another, they think the people in the other party are closed-minded, dishonest, immoral, unintelligent, lazy, or all of them, right? And so without this, or with these high levels of distrust and high levels of assumptions of wrongdoing and immorality across aisles, it really challenges candidates and the public's ability to think about accepting election results when they don't get the person that they want, or to trust that someone from another party could possibly make decisions in their best interests. And this, as Dr. Donaway, I'm sure we'll talk about, is part of what fuels some of the really more assertive and kind of viral media that happens around politics right now. This is a really crazy chart. If you've walked past my door, you've probably seen it. The details don't matter. The point is that each of these lines and colors represents a different kind of switch in the political parties and the coalitions or the groups of people that supported them. And political scientists talk about party systems, which are periods of time in which the groups of people who support political parties have been relatively stable, and the names and the ideologies of the parties have been relatively stable. We've had six party systems in the United States history. Our last party system, most political scientists think, started in the wake of the civil rights movement. There was a realignment about supporting civil rights and around issues of race in the 1960s and early 70s. And the last thing that I want you to just keep in mind as we go into this election season is that we had from 1789 all the way to 1900, there's a lot of movement, right? A lot of new colors, a lot of back and forth coming together, breaking apart. And then beginning in 1900 until 2010, which is when this ends, there's a lot less movement. There's some like attempts at splitting off, but none of them go particularly well or last particularly long. And what I would argue, and I think that a lot of political scientists would argue, is that we are probably in the midst of the beginning of a seventh party system, right? And these are things that we can't know in the moment. We can't know until we have some historical perspective and can look back and say, did the coalitions of the party shift? Did working class voters leave the Democratic Party and go to the Republican Party? Did Black voters start to separate and some support the Democratic Party and more support the Republican Party? What are college educated voters doing? Right? What are women and how are support for parties breaking down along gender lines? There, I think, especially with Donald Trump's candidacy, is good reason to think there is fertile ground for some switch in the party system. I think the outcome of our election, both in Congress and with the presidency, will have a pretty big impact on the extent to which we look back and say 2024 was a really pivotal moment and a new party system solidified. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. But if you've been in my class, you know I love podcasts and I can't help but recommend podcasts. So here are podcasts that I think do a great job of covering either historical or covering the contemporary things that are happening right now that are worth listening to if you are so inclined. And I'll especially point to this one as the person responsible for the historical section here. There is a podcast episode per presidential election. And it does a really nice job of highlighting some of the party dynamics and the historical, political, and economic consequences of events leading into elections themselves. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Highfield.
All right. Can everybody hear me? All right, great. So my area of focus is predominantly on congressional elections and electoral politics more generally. And so I've been tasked with exploring, key races that you might want to look out for, kind of where should you look for information about key races. And then kind of a broader discussion about what drives electoral outcomes in congressional elections, but also elections more generally. And then some Washington specific races you might want to look out for, things that you can get involved with on the Washington level as well. All right, so just to give you all a current kind of a view of what the breakdown of Congress looks like, right? So as you can see here, Republicans have a slight majority in the U.S. House. That doesn't translate based off of the structure of the party right now. That doesn't translate into a lot of legislative effectiveness, however, because of the disunity currently in the Republican Party base. However, they do have a slight majority in the House, and we'll talk about in a moment what that means when it comes to kind of thinking about the upcoming election. And vice versa, you see that the Senate has a slight Democratic advantage. Now, you'll notice that there are 3 yellow dots. That refers to the 3 independents who caucus with the Democrats. Now, there will be, or there's an open seat within one of those in Arizona, which is going to be a competitive race, no doubt. But this is the current makeup of Congress. And as you'll see, or one thing to point out from this, when we think about the House specifically, a lot of early estimates highlight that the House may be more competitive for Democrats. Even though Republicans currently control the House, it might be more competitive for Democrats based off of how President Biden did in House races, in House districts rather, in 2020. So there are currently 17 House seats that were won, that are currently held by Republicans that were won by the president's administration. So the district was won by Democrats in the presidential election, but it voted for House candidates. So that's an important thing to note. Alternatively, when you think about the Republicans only have 5 seats, or let me rephrase that. There's only 5 Democrats that are housed in seats that were won by Trump in the 2020 election. So on its face value, it looks as though those seats may swing back based off of presidential coattails to the Democrats and Republicans respectively. So from that alone, it looks like the House may favor the Democrats moving into the upcoming election. I do want to highlight thinking about how to look for information for competitive races. So this is based off of the Cook Political Report. And what it does is it determines competitive races based off of a series of factors, right? So for instance, it includes things like the background of the candidate themselves. So if the candidate has elected experience, or if they're a political amateur, right? It bases information. It determines competitiveness based off of what does the district makeup look like. So what is the Republican to Democratic breakdown of the district, and it also does it based off the state as well for Senate races, right? And it bases off a number of these kind of factors. Also things relating to the historical competitiveness of the district, right? Did the incumbent that's currently in office win marginally last election? So depending, like maybe 60% or less. Did they win their previous election in a safe district, or was it competitive? So it uses all these variables. And there's just two based off of where we're located that I do want to point out, right? So we have the Washington 3rd District. This is the district held by Perez. And this is a Democratic seat that is one of the 5 seats that Trump carried in the 2020 election. So it's a Democrat holding a seat that Republicans won in the presidential contest in that district. So that's a seat that is considered to be one of the top 20 seats to watch in the upcoming congressional election based off of its likelihood to be very competitive. And then also the Oregon 5th District. This district is based, the reason that this is going to be likely competitive is because of redistricting. So we just had the 2020 census, right? We had the 2022 election based off of changes from the census, but this is likely to be a competitive seat as well based off of redistricting. And there's 11 Democratic seats that are considered toss-ups and 11 Republican seats that are considered toss-ups. But again, based off that information I provided earlier, it's early estimates suggest that Democrats might win the House. And then if you look at the Senate as well, our current Maria Cantwell, that seat is not considered competitive, of course, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But as you can see, right, the Arizona open incumbent held seat. So that's a seat that normally caucuses with Democrats. So Democrats get an advantage in the Senate based off of those independents caucusing. And then you'll see over here, right, we have West Virginia, which is formerly Joe Manchin's seat, right? Joe Manchin is retiring. So that is a Democratic incumbent that is in a solidly Republican held state of West Virginia. So that's going to be an interesting race to watch as well, but it doesn't seem as though Democrats will have much of a chance in that race. And then again, you can see that most of the competitive races in the Senate are actually held by Democrats. So it's likely that Democrats may lose several seats in the Senate, potentially based off of early estimates of competitiveness. And most Republicans that are running are safe Republicans. So that makes me shift a little bit to what traditionally impacts electoral outcomes. And there's a number of things that can potentially impact electoral outcomes. I'm going to focus on 3 of them. Of course, there's other things like voter turnout, which is one of the strongest determinants of, if you can actually get your own co-partisans to turn out to vote. You don't need to win in independents. You simply need to get your own co-partisans to turn out to vote. But I want to focus on 3 things. So first, as we've already heard, partisanship plays an important role in electoral outcomes. One thing I want to highlight here is that how well a member of Congress does in a congressional election, the strongest predictor of how well they're going to do in an election is how well they did in the previous election, right? And this is because of what we know about down ballot voting. Right. So one of the reasons why partisanship plays such an important role is because people don't split their ticket anymore. When you think about a ballot, right? So if you think about a ballot, you think, okay, you have the presidential race and then you have down ballot races. So down the ballot, there's other races, there's House races, Senate races, gubernatorial races, etc. And traditionally in the post-war era, so post-World War II, we saw a lot of people would vote for a Democrat for president and then a Republican for their House seat, right? And this isn't what happens anymore. The simple reality is, if you look at political scientists have looked at this, and anywhere from, based off of estimates, from 91% all the way up to 97% of voters vote straight down the ballot the same party. One of the reasons I highlight that this is the strongest predictor of how well someone's going to do, right, is because people don't vote for the opposite party down the ballot. It just doesn't happen. And so the simple reality is that's going to be an incredibly strong predictor of how well someone's going to do. The next thing I wanted to highlight is money in congressional elections. So just to give you a quick little bit of background, my advisor always in graduate school, I always used to say that money is a necessary but not sufficient means to reelection. What that means is that if you don't have it, you won't win. But if you do have it, you're probably going to win. That it doesn't mean you're going to definitely win. You have to do other things with it. You can't just raise a lot of money and then sit at your house. You have to actually go out and use that money to recruit, etc. But one thing to note is that right now, over 90 to 91% of candidates who raise the most money win their election. So it's increasingly important to raise as much money as you possibly can. And so we've seen every single election, we've seen historic increases in the last midterm, the last presidential election, historic increases in the amount of money raised by candidates. And right now, we've seen presidential candidates in this election have raised, since the election started, over $370 million. They've spent about two-thirds of that so far. And then House candidates have raised about $1.3 billion. Excuse me, congressional candidates, that includes House and Senate candidates, have raised over $1.3 billion. And they've spent 700 to 800 million of it so far. Money is going to play an incredibly important role. And that only includes expenditures and money raised by their campaigns. That doesn't include outside sources like the parties themselves. That also doesn't include lobbyists and independent resources coming into elections. The other thing I would note that's really important about this is that most of the money comes from outside of the congressional district that the person represents. So right now, it's about over two-thirds, almost around 70%, a little above 70% right now, of the money raised in a congressional election comes from outside of a person's district. So we're in the Washington 5th district right now. So that would mean that about 66 to 70% of the money raised in the election for the 5th district probably will come from other districts. And that's often coming from districts that are predominantly on average more unequal from an income inequality standpoint. They're on average the most wealthy districts in the country. So that's something to also consider, is that money is going to play an incredibly important role in this election. And then finally, of course, we have voter perceptions, right? And we have things that voters are currently saying that they care about. At the end of the day, partisanship is going to determine, like, who you voted for in the past is likely who you're going to turn out to vote for now. But people's perceptions of the economy is also is the other strongest issue indicator of how someone's going to do, how a president specifically is going to do in an election, is the state of the economy, but not necessarily the actual state of the economy. It doesn't really matter how well the economy is actually doing. It only matters how well people perceive the economy to be doing. So that's an important distinction. It's not necessarily that the economy is doing well or not. It's what people think the economy is doing. So these are the kind of issues that I would just want you to, when you go out and are preparing to vote yourself, just think about those things as you begin to prepare for voting. And then also, I just want to highlight a couple things just about Washington specifically that you should be aware of and think about as you begin to search and explore candidates. So Washington employs, we haven't had our congressional primaries yet, but Washington employs a top 2 primary system, which means that all candidates, Republicans and Democrats and independents, all run together on the same ballot, right? And in the same primary. Right, and then the top 2 vote getters get to move on to the general election. And so just to keep that in mind, right, the primary is on August 6th. So keep that in mind as you think about who you want to vote for, assuming you're a resident of Washington State. I just want to highlight that. And one thing that's kind of interesting about that, though, when we think about top 2 primaries, a lot of really interesting political science research has shown that there's some positive effects to this. In theory, it's trying to reduce the role of partisanship. that is mixed effect in Washington because you can still see how they lean. And then also we get the voter pamphlets that tell partisan identity, et cetera, on the pamphlets. So there's minimal effect of how much that actually reduces partisanship in Washington. But also one thing that's interesting, a really cool study done in the last 10 years explores in political science research explores what role does partisan, or excuse me, what when with top two primaries, what effect does it have on actually reducing competition? So what it shows is that Republicans and the Democrats, the parties themselves, they recruit less candidates because they have to be as strategic as possible to make sure they get candidates to the general election. So they have to be really strategic, and it actually decreases competition. Just an interesting thing to think about as we move forward. And then the general election is on November 5th, so just make sure you keep that in mind as well. But I'm sure everybody will get that ping on their iPhone as the election rolls around. And then just some things to watch, as we think about Washington specifically, some elections to be aware of, right? Of course, we have Maria Cantwell is running for re-election right now, our current sitting senator. It's not expected to be a competitive election at all. She, just to give you some context, in 2018, she won with, in the general election, she won with 58% of the vote and about 55% of the vote in the primaries. So based on marginality, most people wouldn't consider that to be a marginal contest. And then in 2012, she won with even larger majorities. So it's not likely that she'll be challenged in any serious extent. But we also have a governor's race coming up. So our governor is not seeking re-election. And so we have Democrats Bob Ferguson, who's one of the leading candidates, the Washington Attorney General. And then also we have David Reichert, which is Dave Reichert, which is the lead Republican candidate right now. They're both quality candidates, meaning they've held elected experience. And so they're likely going to be the two to keep an eye on as they move into the general election. And then we have a really exciting, potentially exciting race in Washington 5th District right now, right? So Kathy McMorris Rogers, our representative, if you are from this district and get the opportunity to vote in this district, I would encourage you to explore. Kathy McMorris Rogers is no longer seeking re-election, and so there's some really interesting opportunities to maybe get involved in those races, and in those elections and in those campaigns in the local area as well. So that is probably not going to be the most competitive race either. This district is traditionally not a Kathy Morris Rogers won with a very safe majority in most elections she ran in the last 10 terms. So I wouldn't imagine that it's going to be that competitive, but it'd still be some really good experience that you all should look into about potentially getting involved and getting engaged in local politics in Spokane. And that is all that I have. Thank you all.
Okay, got it. Can you hear me? Lovely. I think I have to switch hands. Oh, wait, no. I'm right-handed. I need this hand. How do you feel about all that information? That was 42 minutes of information about politics. And you must certainly be saturated with so much more information on a regular basis. Is that your experience? No. How many of you are voting for the first time in November? Will you raise your hand? Are you, yeah. Are you excited or not? I got one thumbs up and a few shrugs, a moderately excited group. Part of the reason that you might not feel the excitement that some of us shared for you when we clapped is that this can feel really overwhelming, okay? Understanding the context of political parties and elections is a lot. And understanding all of these different races and who is supporting who and who dropped out and who's now running with this person. It's filled with strategery and drama. And then we have access to just about everyone we know's opinion on it 24/7. which means settling down and figuring out, what do I actually think about this race or this person or this candidate, is more difficult than we expect. And so that's my job here to wrap us up. Okay. My job is to try to prepare you as best I can in 15 minutes, probably now 14, 15, no one's counting, to make sense of the information environment that you will find yourself taken over by in the next 6 months. Sound good? Okay. So the expectations that we have of news media, we're going to primarily start there with news media, are that they gather all the information that would come out of parties and candidates and particular races. And they would sort through it for us, and they would vet it when necessary, and then they would give it to us. And it would be so simple. And we would just make our decisions. Yeah. It's more complicated, right? Because of parties and some other things. So I want to spend the first few minutes of our time here together talking about some realities of what news coverage looked like over the last 2 elections, so we might brace ourselves for what we could expect this election, and then think about some really concrete ways to navigate that sort of maelstrom of information and make sense of it so that you feel equipped and confident and empowered, if you will. Kieran and I just had a conversation about this word earlier today, to make a choice in November. And so then maybe you won't feel so much like this, but more so. Okay. Down arrow. This is the down. This is the down. All right, so the next 2 slides, I'm going to show you our quantitative content analysis. Basically means we scraped a whole bunch of data off of Facebook and counted up what was in the news coverage. That's a fancy summation of a method section that I'm glad to share with you. Okay. And so basically what we looked at are, what are the topics of the coverage in the 2016 and 2020 elections that were posted on Facebook to a variety of news outlets. So it's Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Breitbart, Daily Kos, Fox, and MSNBC. So 6 media outlets. We got a traditional newspaper in there, we got a cable news outlet, and we got an online first. And so what we see across each year, and I'm going to try not to walk in the light here, is that the perennial issues of the moments, immigration, economy, environment, national security, healthcare, make up a teeny tiny percent of the total coverage. In 2016, immigration accounted for 4% of the total political coverage. This data set was from when the vice presidential candidates were announced in probably June or July through when the race was. Economy accounts for about 3% of the total coverage. Again, this is back to the perceptions of the economy, not actual economy coverage, right? Environment, national security, only 5%. So you might ask yourself, what then are we talking about? Do you have any guesses? Anybody want to guess what we're talking about if we're not talking about issues? We are talking about candidates. So good. All right. We're talking about candidates a lot. In 2016, coverage of Donald Trump, his antics, his personality, the things he said, the faux pas, the mea culpas, whatever, account for about 35% of the news coverage. In 2020, that was a little bit more, 39%. His opponent was covered less, 26 and 22% of the coverage. We see policy for each of the candidates is not really well discussed. And we see horse race coverage accounts for about 10 to 11%. So just boo it right now, get it out of your system, boo. Right, okay, good, good, we're all on the same page. So we have this media environment where we say we want to know about all these things. We want to know about the economy. We want to understand what this person thinks about national security, but we're getting a whole lot of personality content instead. And so we have agency over that. We'll get to that in just a second, how we give the news media our feedback on what we would like them to tell us. But before we do that, I want to point out horse race coverage. Dr. Heightfield did a lovely job sharing polling data with you, and that is an approved source of polling data. Find a trusted political scientist to tell you who's winning and who's losing, and ask them and only them. Okay. But what you don't want to do is pay a lot of attention to news media that are covering the race as it is a game or a competition. So Dr. James told us about this idea of parties, and we want to be on a team. And what do teams do? They compete, and teams have, games have, competitions have winners, and they have losers, and we want to make fun of the losers, and we want to be associated with the winners. And this is very engaging information for us, but it's not good for us. So this is one of those moments where we read a story and we go, oh, this feels fun. And then we have to stop it. We have to close it out. We have to minimize that story and select something else. And it's more so than just treating it like a game. It has really negative impacts on the electorate, particularly can increase distrust in politicians and news outlets. It is particularly harmful to female candidates who rely more on policy coverage to kind of get their chops. It can create a very uninformed electorate who only knows the idea of these people don't like that candidate, those people like this candidate, but don't really understand what either of the candidates actually stand for. They just know this group is winning or that group is losing. And you can see how this is really entertaining. Have you ever seen a horse race? One pulls ahead. Yeah, it's super fun, right? We can't treat our political coverage that way, but unfortunately about 10% of the time, and that's only on Facebook. It's a bit higher in newspaper coverage, and on cable news, it's much worse, friends. So, so we really need to be conscientious about that. Part of the reason that this is such a popular way, oh, I flipped it. Orientation, that matters. Part of the reason that this is what's given to us, even though it's not what's good for us, is that we exist in a bit of an attention economy. So we like to believe that we're in a monogamous relationship with our journalists. They give us the news we need, and we in turn are informed, and we make great choices. But really, we're in a kind of three-way relationship with, it's scandalous, I know, with journalists, advertisers, and us. So journalists, media outlets, and organizations are giving us information that keeps us on platforms longer, full stop, friends. The things that keep us on platforms longer are what we are served so that our data might be sold to advertisers, okay? It's not ideal for democracy, but a long time ago, which is beyond the scope of our conversation, we agreed not to pay for media. We wanted our journalism to be free, and therein lies it has to be supported somewhere. They have gone to advertisers. So we have to recognize that our attention, the like bottom of our brainstem, is constantly being chased after. And this kind of tantalizing candidate coverage, so-and-so said this embarrassing thing, fell downstairs, saluted in a tan suit. Do you remember this? Barack Obama, oh, he wore the tan suit. That was very controversial. He also saluted a Marine with a coffee cup in his hand. And that was also, this kind of coverage though, I remember it years later, right? It stays with us more so than a white paper, right? Or more so than lengthy coverage. Okay, so we got to think about our emotions, friends. There are particular emotions that candidates, campaigns, and news outlets need us to feel in order to keep us engaged and on their pages. In no particular order, they are outrage, anger, and enthusiasm. We call these mobilizing emotions. These are emotions that make us want to take action. I want you to imagine that you are walking across Sharp up there north of campus just a little bit, and a car flies through the crosswalk as you're going. This has happened to you, right? Somebody doesn't stop up there. I promise you that when you get to campus, you're going to say, I can't wait to tell you about this driver. Who do they think they are? Outrage is rage that's meant to go out. It wants to be shared. Anger and enthusiasm are both very activating emotions. So you'll recognize campaigns either pissing you off or telling you how brilliant and amazing and hopeful you should be, excited about like a fan moment about the candidate. right? Because this is how they engage you. It is in no campaign's best interest to say everything is fine, close your wallets, no need to donate, we're good, we've got this in the bag. Instead, right? Instead, they're going to say, look at what they're doing over there. They're pulling ahead. They're raising more money than us. They need us to feel these feelings so that we stay engaged. They also have a vested interest in keeping us anxious. If any of you have ever found yourself on WebMD, you understand that when you're uncertain about something, you will continue to search for information longer. So again, telling you everything is fine and good and we're going to win and you're going to be safe is not going to be in anyone's platform speech ever. Okay. There's a vested interest in one party making the other party's voters feeling hopeless. If I pay attention to that horse race coverage and I think that that other candidate is doing so well and it's all in the bag for them and there's nothing I can do and my vote doesn't matter, I withdraw. Right? In order to successfully navigate this, you've got to come into every encounter you have with political news media wondering, what emotion am I supposed to be feeling right now? Whose financial interest is satisfied from me feeling this way? Okay. So I want to offer you a few parting thoughts about how to navigate, how to navigate the news. 3 things we're going to say here. Okay, step 1 is when you can, I want you to pay or subscribe to news. Okay. If you have a favorite artist, you understand that buying their albums does something different than simply streaming it on Spotify. You with me? Right? You want to support their work and you want their work to continue. So when you can, I want you to pick something that you like. One thing is sufficient and pay for it. If you can't do that right now, I want you to log into the Foley library where you can subscribe to both the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times on Gonzaga's dime. It's paid for you. All of you in this room, if you are student, faculty, or staff, have access with your @gonzaga.edu email to get the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times the whole time you're here. Okay, so step 1, we got to stop being so reliant on free media because free media means it's being funded elsewhere. Okay. Step 2, we got to work really hard to pay attention to information that is not entertaining. I'm sorry. It should feel a little bit boring, okay? As we think about kind of where we learn best, if you're watching cable news and you see faces, faces are facing, right? They've got emotions happening, right? If there's a group of people yelling at each other, please turn it off immediately. That's too entertaining for your brain and you're probably not going to learn a whole bunch. Okay. So I want you to think about, are you being entertained here or are you being informed? There's a moment to find entertainment in the chaos that is all of this. But while you're trying to find your footing, this isn't the moment. And finally, when possible, I want you to avoid social news. You say to me, Dr. Donaway, what is social news? Social news is any kind of news where there's a recommendation system that shows you a quantifiable number of likes, comments, shares, that shows you who has read this in your circle. I'm going to tell you why we want to avoid this. I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Deep breaths. Here we go. You need to learn an important thing that's going to be helpful for your major or your career. So you pick a professor and you sign up for their class and it fits exactly in your schedule and you are excited to learn from them. Okay, you find yourself in that place. You're ready to go. You're going to take the hard class. Okay, open your eyes and look at me. Okay. So you come to class on the first day and the professor stands up and they start to tell you the very important but complicated thing that you need to make important decisions. And as soon as they start talking, a screen appears that includes their Rate My Professor scores going live right here. And all of a sudden you find yourself reading their Rate My Professor scores while they're talking to you. And while they're talking to you, 1,000 of your closest friends and family appear from the side of the room and start to say, no, no, not that person, this other person, don't listen to them. And then people appear behind them giving you thumbs ups or I want you to imagine how difficult it would be to ascertain anything that human was trying to say to you. Our brains are not good at removing those heuristics, those mental shortcuts in the form of recommendations and likes and social sharing. Those things really influence how we perceive the news. The comment that pops up, that you can't even avoid, the top comment is already there. That influences how you perceive the news. And that's not to say that person doesn't have something meaningful to say, but you've not even gotten through the headline and you're already getting feedback. Okay. So 3 things we've got to be able to do to feel equipped to navigate that. All of this, then when we're ready, we go talk to other humans about. Talk to humans that we trust, talk to humans that hopefully we are in relationship with. It can be fine to talk to humans who disagree with us. We have to follow these things. We have to be intentional about our goals. We're likely not going to change anyone's mind in a single conversation. That's fine. Let's not try. We need to listen to learn and understand. In order to have a chance at changing their mind, if that's something you're interested in, you got to understand where they're coming from. And you can't begin to do that if you don't know what they value and what they prioritize. And finally, you have to realize that this is hard. Like hard. If persuasion were easy, none of you would think different things. Because we could all wave some sort of like magical wand. None of you would turn in papers late. You would always read the things if we could just say things to you and just change your mind. But it's more complicated than that. But what I will leave you with is that the stakes are high and it's worth it. We came to this institution and we said, we're going to be people for and with others. How can we possibly do that if we won't talk to each other? How can we possibly do that if we won't engage in this messy landscape and take the time to learn a thing in order to feel empowered to make a choice in 6 months or so? Yeah.
All right. Phil, I'm going to be anticlimax and ask you to do one thing that Dr. Donaway told you not to do, is to pull out your phone if you would like right now. Not to get onto Instagram, but here is a QR code that you can scan and engage, right? Ask your questions. But as you're formulating your questions, we already have some coming in. So for no particular reason, maybe we'll start with a reverse order and start with Dr. Donaway first. If you would, you mentioned that our political information shouldn't be entertaining if possible. What are we to make of the Daily Show or John Oliver's programming?
Well, this is an excellent question. I'm so glad you posed it. We think of political entertainment, like satire, for example, as either an appetizer or dessert. So for low information voters, political entertainment or political humor can bring people in and make things accessible in ways that feel like easy entry. For people who consume a lot of political information, it can feel like dessert. That's their debrief at the end of the night. So on that hand, it can be beneficial. What we should realize is that Jon Stewart and John Oliver and any other Johns that are doing this are talking to people who already agree with them. And so we should not try to model their delivery when we're talking to people who disagree with us. They make their living making jokes about political others, which is funny sometimes, and also contributes to a sense of othering, right? The farther we see the other side away from us, the more they are the butt of our jokes, the more difficult it is for us to reason and to sit down and recognize their humanity and learn from them. So I would say carefully, right? It's like anything else. You just want to be conscientious that when you are consuming it, I mean, I hate to like just made a food analogy, to make another food analogy. There are foods that we eat that we know are not great for us, and we make choices about how to consume it, right? In a healthy, body positive way. And so we should perhaps do the same thing with our political news diet. Recognize what the ingredients are. I'm really having fun with this now. And act accordingly.
All right, thank you. This question is probably for Dr. Highfield. You mentioned a couple of important local races. How important do you think Trump and Biden will be impacting other state and local races across the country?
All right, that's a great question. So within the political science research, we've talked about polarization, right? There's also this phenomenon called nationalization, which is the idea that politics are increasingly at the local level, the state level, and the federal level, increasingly focusing solely on national politics, right? So I think when I think about this, my favorite example is I did graduate work in Georgia, and I remember that there was a county commissioner race in rural middle Georgia, in Athens, Georgia. There was a county commissioner race where and I don't know if you, I'll ask this question in a second, but in the county commissioner race, after there was a big town hall, the entire discussion was whether or not the county commissioners or the candidates would endorse Trump's border wall. And I don't know if you know much about Georgia, but it's actually not that close to the Trump, like to the border, believe it or not. And even if it was, it's in the middle of Georgia and it's a local race. So they have actually no impact. Nothing about what they do or what they would ever do has any impact whatsoever on Trump's border wall. However, the narrative of the election was, while there are local issues, they're all being framed through this national lens of, do you support or oppose the president's agenda, right? And so I would say that at the local level and the state level, a lot of electoral outcomes are going to be focused on, whether or not the president or or former President Trump endorsed those candidates, or we saw that have a negative impact in the last election, actually. But in general, I would say that the former president and President Biden are going to have a really important impact on local and state politics because of how nationalized we are. So because of everything, even if there are local issues, they're being focused, they're being evaluated through a national lens. So everything's going to be focused on presidential politics, likely at the end of the day. Yeah, thank you.
And here's a question for Dr. James. Can you talk more about the past party switches and why scholars think we might be going through a party change this year?
Sure. And I'll say too that these things happen slowly, and we can often only recognize them looking behind us, right? So when we look historically, oh yeah, obviously the civil rights movement was the beginning of a new party system. That was like a decade and a half or 20 decades of effort, right? That led to that change. But I think some of the conditions that political scientists think are likely to lead or to catalyze a party change are major racial divisions, right? So racial divisions kind of coming to a head, not unfamiliar to our current time. Major economic challenges, economic disruptions. I think some of the thought behind this is that we are seeing kind of the climax of some of the challenges and reorganization of labor in the wake of globalization right now. And that is in part kind of the shifting away from manufacturing towards service and knowledge industries in the United States, and also shifts away from fossil fuels. All of these movements in our economy are really unsettling for a lot of communities whose sole economic lifeline were grounded in these industries. And we don't yet have great answers on what's next for a lot of communities. And that breeds a lot of resentment and antagonism and frustration with people who are in charge. And that's a great opportunity to start to say, let's do something radically different, right? And then I think, moments of polarization, we've got that in spades. And then I also think that we have an interesting situation at the very moment where we had a party outsider, Donald Trump, come into a political party, and he's not especially ideologically consistent. He has a style that is very populist, right? So he kind of thinks about what is going to be popular with his supporters, and that's what he tends to talk about. And that's thrown the party for a loop, the Republican Party for a loop, which prior to Donald Trump was very consistently ideologically conservative. And so there's lots of things that can change things in politics. And I think the emergence of someone who's really built a brand around personality, and other politicians in the party's inability to replicate that, is also, I think, kind of throwing the party into a little bit space of confusion and uncertainty about what's next.
All right, I saw this question that is really relevant to first-time college voters, so I'm just gonna pick this one. Which state is my vote counted in if I currently am housed on campus, but my permanent address is in another state?
I'll start because I have the mic. Logistically, it depends on where you're registered. So you can register in either location. You can register in both locations. Oh, sorry. Okay. I was like, wow, that's new to me. Not both. Do not register in both locations. That would be a felony. That would be bad. Do not do that. You may pick one location to register in, and you can use your dorm address in Spokane or your home address at home. You should, if wherever you are registering, if you're going to register someplace that you're not going to be on election day, you should also look into absentee ballots so that you can get something mailed to you. And then the other thing, and I'll let maybe the others speak to this in more detail, but you should think strategically about where you feel like your vote is going to count the most. And not that your vote is worth more than anyone else's vote, except that there are certain districts that have close races and there are districts that don't have close races. So, let's say, for example, I'm going to try and come up with do you have an example at the top of your head? Yeah. Like if you live in Spokane, but then if you live in, okay. So the third district. Okay. So if your home is in a close district, maybe you want to stay registered there, right? Because the chances that your vote are going to swing and kind of have an impact on the outcome are higher. If on the other hand, you feel like your district at home is really, really one side or the other, maybe you want to have some influence over your local community here in Spokane, right? And that's a choice to think about.
I would just add that also, while of course you're one vote, one person, right? Depending on what state you're in, your vote matters a lot more than, and of course there's the competitive districts, but just in general, right? If you're in Wyoming, your vote matters more for a Senate seat than if you're in California. Right, and just mathematically, you share a higher percentage of the voting eligible population if you choose to vote. So think again, that's another strategic aspect to it, I would say.
There's actually a highly related question to what you just talked about, but from a different angle. If my state is heavily biased towards one political party, so the second scenario you just talked about, and I tend to lean another way, is there any reason to vote when it's almost entirely improbable it'll change any outcome? Should I go out? Vote.
Yes, period. I'll give you a couple of reasons. First is that it's good practice. That's probably not the most important reason, but that's not unimportant, right? Second, as Dr. Heidfeld talked about, there are down ballot races. So even if the presidential race is like all set and locked up for your state, you could still have an influence over your county judge, your county commissioner, your district attorney in your state, or that's your district attorney in your district, your attorney general in your state. There's so many things that are elected at the local and state level that are not the president that you could have an impact on. And sometimes those races get fewer votes, not often in a presidential race. As you said, most people kind of do the full ticket. But that would be a reason to do it. And then the other thing, and perhaps Dr. Donaway can speak to this, I think there's like a personal efficacy value to it. Even if you don't get what you want, there is still real value in being a part of the process and feeling like you had your say. And you know, that's one way to channel your outrage.
I had a conversation in one of my classes the other day. I asked the students if they were excited to vote, and their responses were a lot like yours. They were like kind of meh, me. And we talked a little bit about why, and we said, oh, it's the same two candidates. And I said, do you know how terrified people are of your voting bloc? Friends that are under the age of 26, let's say, do you know how terrified people are of your voting bloc? Because after the 2022 midterms, there were serious discussions amongst some about raising the voting age to 21 because you scare them. And you should, because there are a lot of you and you care so beautifully about so many things that are happening around us. And you have a moment collectively to let them know why they should be scared of you, or you can do nothing. Choose wisely.
Here's a question I think you can all tackle. There has been a lot of discussion on how Donald Trump has changed the Republican Party. Do you think there's a possible post-Trump Republican Party, or has his presence permanently changed the party as we know?
Okay. So not in the prediction business, but I think that I will say this. I think Trump was both a symptom of a lot of those forces that I was talking about before: globalization, changing racial, gender, social norms, changes in the media environment. He certainly took advantage of that in a really remarkable way. And I think that so I think changes were going to come without him. So is Trump a sufficient change for the Republican Party? No. But I do think the Republican Party and Republican Party leadership are probably going to look really different post 2024, regardless of the outcome. I think what has been really remarkable to watch in the primaries is Nikki Haley winning upwards of 20% of some primaries when she was no longer in the race. Wow, that's bananas, right? We don't see things like that very often. And so what that tells me is that there are people who are not Democrats who are also not wanting to support Donald Trump. And what I think about when I hear this question is, where are those people going to go? Are they going to stay in the party? Are they going to leave? And who, I think the other question, the thing to pay attention to get a sense of where this might go is who, if anyone, can follow up Trump's populist style in a way that is as effective and engaging for his base. And I think, as we saw with Ron DeSantis and many others, that's been a really hard act to follow, right? So I don't know where it's going, but I think those are some things to keep an eye on. Dr. Heightfield, do you have anything to add on that one? Okay.
Yeah. So I won't say what will happen to the Republican Party because that's beyond the scope of my expertise. But I will tell you that the news media is asking themselves hard questions. There's a process called meta-journalistic discourse. It's very clear, doesn't it? It's like journalists talking about journalism. When they get it wrong after a scandal or an unprecedented presidential election, they kind of look back at our coverage and say, like, what did we do here? And I think the feeling from 2016 was that journalists, and I'm making some sort of big generalizations here, so just run with me for a second, but They thought that if they just delivered information without context to people, that people would then make choices that supported the information. So like Access Hollywood tapes were released, and without context, it was like, this person admitted to sexual assault on camera. We will make this available for you. Do with it as you will. And I think what they're grappling with right now is how much context, whether it's historical perspective, to say, this is unusual for a candidate to call a group of people this name or whatever. That second piece they are grappling with right now. Is it their job to contextualize that? How does that play into, Trump saying that all the news is fake and not real anyway? So if they do contextualize it, does that just like reaffirm his narrative? Right. So I think news after Trump, TBD, but is going through some real kind of choices about how they want to present information. Because it used to be just like, we will gather the facts and we will make the choices. And I think they're realizing like, maybe we should have done more to say that this is not normal or this is unusual, but also would that matter?
So many good questions. We won't be able to cover everything. We will have 10 minutes left. So we're looking at 2 here. And if your questions are not picked or answered, please feel free to reach out to all of these wonderful professors, and I'm sure they will provide the answers for your questions. So one, why can't we trust the election results?
Can. Yeah. That's a great question. And one that is at least, well, to provide some context, this is not a question that we normally ask at election time. Prior to your political lifetime. So I mean, in like the last 5 years or so, it was not normal for people to ask the question of, are these elections results real? We have very clear data and evidence and procedures. We have really great procedures. States and state attorney generals and attorney, did I get that right? Secretary of State. There's people who run elections. They know their job, not me, who run elections at the state level that are incredibly thoughtful. We have really secure technology. The elections are ones of integrity. The questioning of it is new. I will also say that one of the important kind of precedents that was really remarkable early on in this experiment we're calling American democracy was what was called the Revolution of 1800. And we call it that because it was not an actual revolution with a war, but it was the first time that someone of one political party lost to the person of a different political party. And there was this tension. There was this moment of like, is John Adams going to step down? He really dislikes Thomas Jefferson and his policies. Like, what's going to happen? We've never seen this before. A king never stepped down and let someone else take over because the people told him to. And John Adams did. And I don't think he was happy about it, right? But he did step down. He went back to Quincy in Massachusetts and like did his thing. And he let Thomas Jefferson take over, even though he didn't like what Thomas Jefferson had to say on a lot of things, right? That has been the norm in American politics since then until now. And so I don't have great examples except to tell you that many, many people have looked at the elections and how they're run in states. Many, many people have done extensive vetting of the technology. And we should and can trust the election results, but the questioning of it is something that is new. And this is not to say we shouldn't continue to be skeptical and ask questions, but the way in which Donald Trump in particular went about kind of pushing on electoral workers and the process is new in American politics. I don't know if you guys have more procedural reasons, but that's my
I would just add that from a Washington specific standpoint, right, we use mail-in ballots. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that we should trust our mail-in ballot system in the state of Washington. The Secretary, so each county runs their own elections. Secretary of State's office does a really good job of auditing elections at the Washington level. And they also do a really good job of having independent auditors come to each county. So I would say that from a Washington specific perspective as well, we have a lot of reason to trust our electoral institutions. And the other thing I would say too is that there's no evidence to suggest that that our electoral institutions have any systematic issues when it comes to reliability. But one thing that's really alarming is the loss of trust in our institutions. And that's really challenging because trust is something that is it's an opinion that's shaped and it's very stable and it's really hard to rebuild. So once we lose trust in institutions, alarmingly so that there's no reason to lose the trust in the institutions. But since we've lost a lot of trust in these institutions, I don't think this is the question that's going away. And it's unfortunate because, I mean, of course, it's good to be aware of potential for negative influence into an electoral system, right? That's a natural thing to be concerned about. Just in general, you want your elections to be secure, right? We have a lot of evidence to show that they are secure. Therefore, the trust is not founded to lose that trust, but unfortunately, we've lost a lot of it. So rebuilding that, I think, is incredibly important. And I don't know exactly how to do that, but it's really alarming to me because of how formed people's opinions are when it comes to trust. Once you lose it, it's really challenging to rebuild trust. Yeah, so I would just add that little point.
This is the why we should trust the election result. There's this fabulous equation that I'd be glad to share with you. That's about conspiracy theories, and it maps out how many people would have to be involved in order to execute. I mean, drill down, right? Like, let's entertain it for a second. How many people would have to be involved in such a wide scale manipulation of humans at the county, city, state, and federal level? I mean, thousands of people would have to be involved to pull off such a thing. And what are the chances by which not a single one of them wants a book deal by now? There's actually an equation to support this, and it's based on previous things that people like the Pentagon Papers being released. So things that were true after the fact, and they map out how long can the secret be held. And the one with the election, I think, is like, it would last like 44 days or something like that. And we are well past 44 days. And so those are either ironclad NDAs, friend, that thousands of people have signed and agreed to, or we can trust our institutions and someone benefits from us questioning about whether we can trust them, right? When we're thinking back about what emotions we're feeling and who benefits from that, this is that united we stand, divided we fall friend thing. If we don't trust our institutions, then it disenfranchises people to vote. Who benefits if you don't think you can trust the elections and you don't vote? Any groups come to mind?
All right, maybe for our last question, very quick answer from each panelist. Is it possible that as we enter this new partisan realignment, we will need to restructure some of our institutions of government that have been built up by two-party rules?
I'll make one clarification that kind of sidesteps the question. Sorry. I don't think we're leaving an era of two-party rule. I just think that who's a part of the parties is going to change. I'm pretty skeptical that as this question writer so thoughtfully indicated, two-party rules pretty well entrenched. I think it's probably going to stick around for a little while. But to Dr. Donaway's point about hope and fear in a good way of your generation, I'll put my generation in there too. I think millennials and Gen Zers have some power. We care. I think that there is more hope than ever that things like the Electoral College may not survive another 100 years. Not putting money on it, but I think if any two generations could maybe be fed up enough with it at this point, it might be ours. So we'll see. But it's going to take some effort on our behalf. But I think we're still going to end up with two parties for a while. It's just who's in them is going to be a little different. Also, I'm going to do a quick plug because I have the microphone. If you're interested in these topics, you should take Dr. Donaway in my classes next semester. They're available for registration right now.
I would just reiterate that point that it doesn't seem as though we're going to leave a two-party system anytime soon. But there are, features that could change that two-party system, of course, right? Getting revising or abolishing the Electoral College could theoretically do it. Shifting toward something like ranked choice voting might revise the two-party system. Those are just some options that could revise the system, but if those aren't done, then it's unlikely that we'll ever leave a two-party system, at least not. I would also not bet any money on that.
All right. Thank you all for coming, and let's keep this conversation going.